Belgrade, Helena, Missoula, Brazil. Awesome. Spencer, I will take a motion to get started, I think, now that we're at 7:04.
All right, I will mute our music here and you can go ahead.
Thanks for the music. Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Lila Livingston. I am an organizer with Sunrise Movement here in Bozeman. I also grew up here. I would like to begin our night with a land acknowledgement. For all of us here in Bozeman, we are on the ancestral lands of the Cheyenne, Blackfoot, Salish Kootenai, and Crow nations. And as we come together tonight on Zoom to learn, to organize, I want to invite us all to remember that the towns, cities, and the state that we live in the Rocky Mountain West and beyond, are occupied lands that the Cheyenne, Blackfoot, Salish Kootenai, and Crow nations are the past, present, and future caretakers of. As we work toward justice and liberty, passing the PRO Act, we must acknowledge the ever-present systemic inequity and oppression of people and commit indefinitely to the respect of and reconciliation of this long-standing history of injustice. And now that everyone has had a moment to introduce themselves in the chat, looks like we have a few more people rolling in. If you want to introduce your name, pronouns, location, where you're zooming in from in the chat, that'd be fantastic. And I am also going to point everyone to the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom bar. There's a Q&A button that you can press, and Spencer is going to be collecting questions throughout the evening, questions that you have about the PRO Act, questions that you have for our specific panelists tonight. And so, yeah, throw any questions you have in there, and we're gonna get started. And tonight we're gonna plan on spending time here for I think an hour and 15 minutes. So thank you all for being here, and I'm gonna pass it over to Isabel.
Thank you, Lila. And again, thank you all so much for being here. My name is Isabel, and I organize with Gallatin Valley Sunrise. The Sunrise Movement, for those who don't know, is a network of youth activists working to ensure a livable future for all. We are in a moment of historic crisis, a health crisis, an inequality crisis, a racial justice crisis, and a climate crisis that looms over all of it. This spring, Sunrise Movement across the nation launched the Good Jobs for All campaign, laying the organizing groundwork and economic vision for a post-pandemic society that puts millions of people to work. The PRO Act is one of the core pillars of that campaign, for the federal government to guarantee meaningful work to all and ensure workplaces empower and protect their workers. Millions of young people are looking for good work. And there is so much good work that needs to be done. It will take millions of people to build a new energy grid, care for older folks, teach little kids, restore parks and buildings that have fallen into disrepair, and do the work of building happy and healthy communities. This year, we can create millions of good-paying jobs while building a sustainable, just, and people-centered economy. The original New Deal was won through militant labor organizing. The PRO Act will help build labor power as strong as it needs to be in the months and years ahead to win a just transition to a green economy for all communities. And with that, I will pass it to Bonnie and Mark to tell us more about the PRO Act.
My name is Bonnie Lambert. I'm co-chair of Helena DSA. For
And
DSA,
I'm Mark. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm just going to say I'm Mark Anderlich, co-chair Western Montana DSA.
Work.
For DSA, a first step in ensuring that Biden keeps his campaign promises to support labor and offer real proposals for robust action to counter our climate emergency is an all hands on deck call to organize support for the PRO Act, the Protect the Right to Organize bill that is now in the Senate, having been passed by the House last year. The PRO Act could ignite a major revival of unionization and working class power. Here is a short history of recent union history and a brief description of the act. Picture this: an economy roaring along, new consumer technology is wildly popular among tens of millions of Americans. The wealthy get wealthier and unions are weak. Then disaster strikes. The economy goes into free fall while the government flails about in response. What was received economic wisdom 10 years earlier becomes stale and out of date. Sound familiar? This is a description of 1931, 90 years ago. And we find ourselves in a similar situation today. The question today is, can we as a nation find our way out of the current gilded age of great wealth among the few and great poverty among half of the working class? Of course, the Great Depression was in full swing by 1931, and the policies of President Herbert Hoover did little to bring relief to suffering Americans. That helped pave the way for Franklin Roosevelt to be elected in 1932. But Roosevelt did not pull the US out of depression all by himself. Throughout the 1930s, workers organized into unions at an unprecedented scale. These newly organized workers not only helped defend Roosevelt's New Deal, they also pushed Roosevelt to take stronger actions. It was the rise of the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO, part of the AFL-CIO, that led the way in that union upsurge. Organizing by workplace rather than by job description, the CIO became famous for the occupation of the General Motors plants in Flint, Michigan, among others. Their organizing tactics and strategies became gold standard in organizing success. The CIO organizing methods built active solidarity among diverse union members who confidently used strikes to alter the fundamental power between workers and their employers. The National Labor Relations Act, also known as the Wagner Act, comprehensively laid out the ground rules for this struggle between labor and capital. And for the first time, it was official US policy to encourage and protect collective bargaining and to use grievance and arbitration to resolve ordinary worker-employer disputes. This meant that the government must protect workers' rights to organize into unions to redress the imbalance of power between workers and employers. For there can be no collective bargaining if workers had no power, as is the case when they are not organized or not well organized. As the US entered the Second World War, its industrial might became second to none. Unions grew in membership and in power. While there was a government imposed truce during the war, the struggle picked up steam after it ended. Of course, the wealthy and corporate interests were not entirely subdued. After the war, while Democrat Harry Truman was re-elected president, the Congress became majority Republican. And those Republicans were deeply alarmed at the growing power of workers. One of their main weapons to reduce the power of workers was the 1947 passage of a bill known as the Taft-Hartley Act. This act amended the Wagner Act in many ways. First, it allowed state legislatures to pass a free rider act known as the so-called right to work, which we're pretty familiar with here in Montana. Then it restricted unions to strike and picket only the specific employer in the dispute, forbidding what is known as secondary boycotts and strikes. Next, it allowed employers to fire most strikers, making the strike a rarely used tool. Next, it put various restrictions and conditions upon unions that did not apply to employers. Lastly, the Taft-Hartley Act demanded the removal of all communists from leadership or staff positions. This last provision was included in the act because the union's most effective organizers, the ones who built the CIO and the union movement we have today, were mostly communists. While this provision in the act was found unconstitutional in 1962, it had already done its damage as most unions shed their most effective organizers. This became the first of many shameful actions in what became known as the McCarthy era, where communists and many others were hounded out of their jobs or worse because of the fear of communism. With the leftist organizers out of the way, unions and employers entered in a so-called golden age, where the struggles of workers were mostly kept to battling their employers. And employers, by and large, did not fight unions very strenuously. But this was not to last. When President Ronald Reagan, the first president to have also been a union president, the Screen Actors Guild, fired the striking air traffic controllers, it marked the end of the truce between labor and employers. Having shed their most effective organizers a generation earlier and not maintaining the organizing culture within their organizations, the labor movement was quickly on its heels. And as union membership has dropped from relentless attacks on the private sector unions and even attacks on teachers and others in the public sector, most unions' ability to fight back, much less expand, was severely restricted. Mark?
Today we have the PRO Act, which undoes most of the hobbles placed on unions under Taft-Hartley and other legislation and policy. For example, the PRO Act eliminates so-called right-to-work laws passed in many states. It also forbids employers from firing strikers in most cases. It also allows for solidarity boycotts and secondary strikes, and makes intermittent strikes, slowdown strikes, and partial strikes protected concerted activity. And it repeals the ban on hot cargo agreements that helped make the Teamsters Union powerful before 1959. Many of the strongest weapons used by employers to destroy unions will all be illegal under the PRO Act. Weapons such as worker captive audience meetings, like we are seeing Amazon is employing against warehouse workers organizing in Bessemer, Alabama. And the PRO Act would forbid lockouts, such as we saw done against the talc workers in Three Forks, Montana. And it would ban employers from unilaterally imposing their conditions upon workers if they reach impasse with the union in collective bargaining. The PRO Act would also formalize into law rapid and timely elections for union recognition, thereby forbidding months and months of delay, which give the employer time to mount an anti-union campaign to intimidate their workers into abandoning the union organizing drive. And if the employer violates the law during a union election that likely affected the outcome, the National Labor Relations Board, the government agency that oversees labor law, can use signed union cards, which were usually signed before the employer knows of the drive, as the method to determine if a majority of workers want a union. The PRO Act also brings in arbitration to resolve first contract disputes with newly recognized unions. To break newly formed unions, employers commonly drag out first contract bargaining for a year, at which time the union vote expires, and the union has to start all over again. The PRO Act expands the definition of employee, including gig and precarious workers who work for Uber and Lyft, for example. It restricts the definition of supervisor, who for obvious reasons cannot belong to a union, to those who are part of the management. This would allow nurses to more freely organize, for example. And the PRO Act defines employers to include corporations who dictate to franchises how they are to manage their workers, such as McDonald's. When employers violate the law now, the only remedy offered workers is back pay minus what they have earned or should have earned, with no fines or any other punishment to the employer. The PRO Act would provide for hefty and meaningful fines, worker back pay without deductions, payment of other damages to the worker, and the ability of the government to impose stiff punitive damages against the employer. The PRO Act would put actual teeth into labor law for the first time. And it will do many other similar things. The PRO Act would transform the legal landscape for workers to something like it was for workers in the union heyday of the 1930s and 1940s. We hope that's a lot of information to take in, but we hope to introduce these ideas to you and introduce you to the PRO Act, and hope this forum will inform you and inspire you to support the PRO Act. Now, during this meeting, we will hear from 3 workers who will tell their stories about trying to organize workers under the current law. First up is Ty Wheeler. Ty was a snow coach guide working for Delaware North in Yellowstone National Park. Welcome to our panel, Ty.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me. I'll give you a quick little bit of background. I've got about 10 minutes on just kind of what happened and what the PRO Act would mean for us in our struggle. So I've been guiding over the world for years, guiding for a small family company in Yellowstone by the name of Alpine Guides. The contract was effectively put out by the name of Delaware North. Delaware North, if you're not familiar, it's the company that trademarks the naming rights to Yellowstone National Park and also to the Ahwahnee tribe. So actually trademarked a tribal name. We, the American taxpayer, paid millions of dollars back to that company so that they could then come to Yellowstone and buy up all the family run around Yellowstone, including the contract that I was running under. So what ended up happening was I really kind of grew up in an anti-union family. I didn't even know what the NLRB was before this. I didn't even know that there were protected rights. And I didn't even know that when I work in the summertimes, I'm actually protected by a union until we realized how bad things can really get. So Delaware North has come in, they've bought up properties all around Yellowstone, including housing for employees. So employees come seasonally, and this is a big common factor in Montana with seasonal employees, and they'll stay in the company housing. They then pay rent, up to 4 people per room. And I want you to think about this as COVID starts to unroll here. So as the season starts, we realize that the entire architecture of the guiding ecosystem has changed. They own now about 75% of the seats that are entering the park on any given day. So that's your access to Yellowstone. Our wages have dropped from the company we're working for to $12 an hour. And instead of being guaranteed 5 trips, we're 1-2 days per week. So if you do the math, you're paying almost all the money you make back to Delaware North to live in a room with 3 other people. So the culture, and for them, it makes sense because then they can hire as many guides as they want or other, because they're. So think that we're ending December. This is of 2020 hits. January, we start hearing from what coronavirus is. They're wearing masks, they're concerned. And we're just, some people are food bank. For me, I'm a veteran. There was another veteran that ended up in the line at the food bank. So things have gotten quite dire. And if you've been to West Yellowstone, you know that it's remote. So 2 guides that had come on and worked with us came from Denali, and they said, this is make a decent wage. They have health care, they have sick pay. It may be helpful if Ty turns off his, what is that? Sorry, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. You're breaking up just a little bit.
Remote Montana. Great. I might call in. Would that make sense if I called in, or?
I'd say forge ahead. I think we
good.
can work with it.
Sorry, Spencer. So anyway, we ended up getting what's called we sent to the guides so that they could review after we talked about how bad things were. Then 5 got in and fired, or 4 of us rather. I picketed with Sophie on Monday after we were fired, or those guys were fired, and just said, I talked to our union representative, and yeah, I said, I picketed, I was fired by the company about 15 minutes after. They effectively charged the following week, including an NPS ranger, who was working for the company. So we ended up knowing our rights, having the union representative telling us to call the NLRB. We called the NLRB. We told them the story. They flew out. In 3 weeks, we had 11 charges found with merit against the company. It included unlawful discharge. They actually called the police on us. We had a Forest Service ranger tell us that Montana was a right to work state. Just go home. Told us we could not picket on the sidewalks in West Yellowstone. And these are officers who are members of a union. Sorry, it looks like the connection's not great. So long story short is we finished the charges with merit. We end up in a precarious situation where it's very clear that they were in violation. We ended up settling with Delaware North, but they only had to be guaranteed back pay, which is a guide with the record that they had was less than $1,000 per person. We ended up, let's see. Yeah, and I'll show some counts. So we have some photos of this. We ended up having to settle with Delaware North because of the current ecosystem. This was last year. And so we had a lot of, I'll try turning off the video and see if that'll help with our data here. So we ended up having the charges go settled, and then we ended up having new charges this following year for discrimination. So we're in the process of going through the merit process, and then also any appeals that we have to do regarding those charges. So it's been a learning process, and I really want to thank Mark. I really want to thank everyone that's been involved with this, so that we could learn and actually use this as a precedent. I want to just touch on a few things with the PRO Act. The punitive damages, you could only go after back pay, and we're basically laid off. 3 of them had to move out of housing in a -degree weather that the company had over them, so they couldn't and join us. So I want to thank Spencer for coming out and picketing with us and representing. A couple of them and actually back from Utah and the other places that they'd gone to and Sheridan to actually join in the fight. But it's very difficult for them. They paying less than, they had to pay fees. They hired the best attorney firm in the country at fighting labor union law. So besides that, we got a very minuscule amount that was hardly meaningful, but it allowed us to create verbiage to allow for our others to go forward. They had to post a unification. The NLRB makes you post a whole list of 15 things that they won't for future employees at all of the vacation tours to top. They own half of West Yellowstone, so I won't go through the.
Did you just send another one?
But really
Or you
ruined
edited the one?
people there. It's fragile. It's time sensitive, and they ended up throwing a morale after they. When you look at the culture and you look at the onus that is on the employees to create a union, it really begs the question of why do we have such a soft ecosystem where for Delaware North, who's making $92,000 a day on a good day on guided trips alone, and they're only paying about $4,200 to the guy. Are phenomenal. For them, the cost of blatantly violating labor law is easily a cost of business. So moving forward with the PRO Act, we need meaningful fines. As we're moving forward, we need to look at contractors that have contracts to operate in our national parks to be held at a higher standard. And if they violate those, we need to be able to take their contracts and replace them with companies that have a good record of taking care of their employees, don't then end up on the pocketbook the state, because every season all these employees that come out for the opportunity of time that fired have to go and settle or file for unemployment, and the state has to then bear the cost of taking care of the workers while they're making an absolute fortune. So as far as the PRO Act goes, it needs to be done. I've worked all over the world. I've worked in 12 countries. I've seen doctors and nurses protest in France. I've cycled around piles of manure to reach Mont Saint-Michel with my guests, because that's how unity works. You have to fight back in order to get just a basic question over sick pay, health care, a living wage. For us, as coronavirus was coming out, they found coronavirus in the septic in West before they ever tested a single person. And we were so anyways, that's our story. Mark, I'll send it back to you. Much appreciated for your education that you've given us to continue this fight. It's been a long one.
We'll continue it too. Zeth?
Yes, no, Ty, thank you so much for telling us that story about seasonal workers. As someone who came to Bozeman as a seasonal worker at Big Sky, the courage that it takes to stand up whenever these, kind of touristic companies that like literally just have like every single part of your life, like every single schedule, hour you're living, able to hold over you. That takes a lot of gusto and I guess gumption. And so thank you to Ty. And also, if Delaware North is the one who is screwing up Ty's connection, maybe we can get that in the PRO Act somewhere too. With that being said, this story that he just told, with the PRO Act was passed, we want to connect it. The illegally fired snow coach workers would not have money deducted from their back pay award, as Ty was talking about. Delaware North would have faced stiff fines for their outrageous behavior, and the workers could have sued Delaware North for damages. And the NLRB could have posed punitive damages on the corporation. It's a little bit different from our current labor law and would make employers think twice about messing with workers. Now, I would like to introduce our next guest, Miles McCarville. Miles is in the Iron Workers Local 14 Union as an organizer, and he's also the president of the Montana Building and Construction Trades Council. Welcome to our forum, Miles.
Thank you, Zeth. I guess I'll give you a brief background on myself and kind of explain some stuff. My name's Miles McCarville. I'm with the Ironworkers Union, like you just said, and the president of the Montana State Building and Construction Trades Council. And Mark Anderlich reached out to me and asked that I talk to you guys about some campaigns that we've been involved with, and kind of some of the things that employers are capable of doing to shut down unions, and what some of the difficulties are, like captive audience meetings and things like that. But first, I want to talk about, my history. I guess in 1996, I went to welding school and got a degree, and then I worked non-union in the metal fabrication and art industry for about 8 years. And, I worked usually 2 jobs at a time and did whatever I could to get by, but I was always living check to check, and I honestly, I still am. But really, what got me into a union, and it was my brother got leukemia when I was 28 and he was 30 years old, and it just made me realize, like, we're all cornered, and without if one thing goes wrong, then you can lose everything almost instantly. And I think really, during the coronavirus pandemic, we're really starting to see, just basic things like the average American can't handle a $400 unexpected expense, or that's going to cause chaos in their world. So from my experience, organizing a union is just kind of chaos. It's like, I don't know if you guys have ever read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but it's like the infinite improbability drive of, like as soon as you think you've got something figured out, you wake up and you're sitting in the middle of a soccer field on a red velvet couch, and your underwear are 3 feet to the side of you or something. You just don't know what to expect. And I've been on some of these campaigns that have been successful, and some that haven't been. The most recent one that we were involved with was in a metal fabrication shop, and these things. I've been an organizer for 7 years, and when you first start, you go out and you're trying to get on site and talk to different workers and see if there are any issues. But really, the biggest campaigns that I've been involved with really fell from the sky, and people reached out to us and just we're so fed up and so cornered that they just couldn't take it anymore, and they called us because they just didn't know what else to do. So anyway, sorry, I just read one of the chat comments. Hitchhiking, it's fear and loathing on the campaign trail. But the last group that reached out to us, there was a outbreak, or not an outbreak, but worker went to work in the shop, and they had coronavirus, and they told the employer and then left, and the employer didn't let anyone in the workplace know. And they just kind of downplayed it, and then people found out about it and that they were exposed and all that, and were upset, and that's why they reached out to us. And it was a really interesting campaign because there was some changes that happened under the Trump administration through the NLRB, and they happened literally in the middle of the campaign. And, you know, sometimes there's kind of different ways that an employer can react to a union campaign. And, you know, usually people are just unaware of the law, and employers often think that they can just kind of get away with anything. And if you don't like what they're dishing out, they'll just fire your ass, and that's it. And this particular company, I don't know if they had organizing attempts before or what, but in any case, right off the bat, they hired a law firm to help combat the campaign, and really they were quite good. And also, you got to keep in mind, you know, it was during a pandemic, so nobody really knew what to do. This was, you know, and I think we got called probably in May. So we had about a month and a half to work with all these workers, and you know, we by the time we filed, I mean, we had a really solid campaign. We thought it was going to be a slam dunk. And, you know, people were fired up. We had been having meetings for months, and, you know, lots of people were showing up, and there was really active workforce there. But then we filed a campaign, and the laws started changing as well as we went through the process. So they brought in all these union buster attorneys, and you know, just kind of started with kind of a legal threat, because basically, like a union and the employer, we're both bound by the same rules in the current Labor Relations Act. So they can spin things to make it look like, oh, well, you know, unions can't threaten you. Unions can't, you know, coerce you. They can't do all these things that actually, you know, the law was intended to be towards the employer. But, you know, they're right. Same things. We can't do the same things. We can't go around beating people up and breaking legs to get them to sign contracts. And, you know, so this particular campaign, there was around 130 employees, and they in the offset, when you have inertia, you know, like I said, we thought it was a slam dunk. As things started to unravel and the new labor laws began to unfold, we started running into all these things. You know, I mean, these are really emotional and intimate things. I mean, someone's livelihood, people are scared to death. And, you know, in the secret part of it, before the company knew what was happening, they were really getting empowered because we were telling them what their rights were, and you know, that we were going to be there to help protect them. But once the employer found out about it and hired these attorneys to come in, the intimidation was instantly there, and the company just said, look, we can do this without you guys. We don't need you. We've got multiple shops around the country. This isn't the only one. You know, we can shut the doors. The most you can do is go on strike. And do you guys understand how much that's going to cost you? Do you understand what the top level executives of unions earn in a year? And all the different tactics that they did. And it was, you know, I was actually impressed because, like I said, I've done this a couple of times with different companies, and usually they just start firing people and breaking every labor law there is, and that's easier to respond to, you know, because then you just start filing unfair labor practice complaints with the NLRB, and you know, it's actually easier. But when someone hires an attorney, like Ty had spoke about, the tables can kind of quickly, I guess, be manipulated. You know, and some of the things like, you know, they start giving the employees these captive audience meetings, and they're putting up on a board in front of everybody that, you know, we, like I said, we don't need you. We can shut down the shop. We can bring in people to replace you. You know, your only hope is to go on strike, and you can't collect unemployment. You're gonna. This is. They told them how much the COBRA payments would be for them to keep insurance for their families. They talked about how much if they just invested their union dues, you know, the $40 a month for 25 years, that they'd end up with $45,000 at the end of it. It just kind of went on and on. And some of the stuff that we did is we pointed out, like, yeah, you know, the owner of this company just bought a $9.4 million home in Florida, and their retaliation was, you know, to show all our general officers and what they make and what the president of the Ironworkers Union makes, and any number bigger than, you know, $50,000 to the average American worker sounds huge. If somebody tells you, oh, this person makes $200,000 a year, I mean, we're thinking millionaires. You know, we're not thinking about like Jeff Bezos and some of the different people that just, you know, have kind of infinite amounts of money. So when somebody says, oh, this guy's making $200,000 or $300,000 a year to run a 140,000 member organization, it sounds like a big thing, but here they are buying, you know, $9 million homes. And of course they always come up with, you know, like with these, like how they pick themselves up by the bootstraps and started this business with nothing, and how, you know, the quarterly profits of this year didn't look very good. And, you know, we were almost thinking about shutting this shop down in the first place. And then, you know, but we've got this commitment to our employees. It's nonstop. And, you know, I literally, there was about 40 different pages. Here's a printout of all this is all the different letters and things that the company set out to employees, and you know, like even Mark and I were talking about this stuff, and you know, I didn't really have time to put together a PowerPoint or anything, and also just this stuff came to us grassroots. I mean, this is these are, you know, pamphlets that were handed out in these captive audience meetings, and then our employers or the employees in the shop were, you know, kind of sneaking their phone out and taking pictures of them, or, you know, trying to not catch attention because they could be fired. It was just, you know, so a lot of the stuff, they're just like pictures that were taken and sent to us to kind of give us an idea of what the employer was doing. And ultimately in this campaign, because of the extensions, like really the biggest hardship, it just to give you the end result, this campaign failed. The final vote was 67 to 37, and there was 131 employees, so some of them didn't vote. Um, but the interesting thing about it to me in this particular campaign was some of the rule changes and how quickly it affected us. You know, one of the things, it used to be like when you file a petition, there was 7 days for you to resolve things on who was going to be in a collective bargaining unit, who is allowed to vote. So a tactic by employers is they want to bring in all the people that will vote against the union. So they want, you know, they try to contest whether they're who their management is, or if the you know, the maintenance man is an employee, and that can drag things out. And it used to be, like I said, it would take 7 days to that was the timeline. And they changed it to 14 days. And they also changed it to 14 business days. So in reality, then it was Monday through Friday. And it went from 7 days total to almost 3 weeks to get any kind of final answers on this. So it was a 30-day process, and they shortened it down to, originally it was supposed to be a 30-day process, and they extended it out to be what I think we started we filed in the June 16th, and it continued into August 8th was the day that they sent out the ballots, and the votes were tallied, I think, on the 23rd. The results were met on the 26th. So these timelines and all the, you know, there's a lot of nuances to these things, but the longer you want to get in there and get it done fast, because the longer they have to intimidate the workers and tell them that they're going to lose their jobs and that it's hopeless, the better their chances are. So anyway, that was kind of my 10 minutes, and I'll let the next person speak.
Great. Thank you so much, Miles. Those were amazing stories. The ones that didn't end the way we would hope, obviously, are good to still learn about. I think they really show why we need the PRO Act. I mean, no matter who you are, what race you are, what class you are, whether you're in Bozeman or Billings, like, we all in Montana know that we want to feel safe. And it's really clear that without something like the PRO Act, you just can't feel safe organizing and can't feel safe in your work. And that's because, I mean, we saw in the chat, the people in power are working together to keep us down. And so we have more people, and we need to work together to make sure our rights are followed. So all those things you mentioned, the capped audience meetings, the long drawn out union recognition elections, and the unrestricted use of union busting law firms will be illegal if the PRO Act is passed. So I'm super excited to introduce Tammy Kim, our next speaker. She actually was a workers' rights lawyer, so the good kind of lawyer, and is now a freelance writer, unionist, and last fall she taught labor journalism and advised the student newspaper, The Kaiman, at the University of Montana. So thank you so much for being here, Tammy.
Thanks so much, Lucy. And thank you so much to DSA and to Sunrise for inviting me, and to Zeth and Mark and Spencer in particular for the invitation and care in putting this event together. I'm really excited to be with you guys, and I really miss Montana, so I'm picturing the skies you're under right now. I want to say that I really empathize with what Ty and Miles just presented. Before I was a freelancer, I was a W-2 worker, and I organized unions in several of my workplaces with my coworkers. And I have sat through those captive audience meetings and seen union busting, and it's hard to overstate the impact of the PRO Act. In one of my workplaces, we were going to go with an NLRB election until some friends were like, whatever you do, don't engage the NLRB, because it was so ineffective for workers. So, we know what the changes need to be. I'm going to talk tonight about the freelancer part of the PRO Act, which is really a kind of tiny sliver of the act, but needs attention because freelancers who oppose the PRO Act have just been so vocal about it. So we need to understand why they are being so vocal against the PRO Act and what can be done. So I thought tonight I would talk a little bit about the history of the freelancer category under employment and labor law, and my experience as a freelancer and efforts that we've made to try to organize, but what the limits of that are under current law. And Spencer's going to help with my slides. So slide, please. Last April, when the pandemic lockdown had started to gut everything but office work, I reported on what Uber and Lyft drivers around the country were doing to survive. Don, a 66-year-old full-time Uber driver in Seattle, described how his work had evaporated within the span of a few days. People think gig work is so cool because of the flexibility, and that flexibility is nice, he told me. But all of a sudden, you don't work for 2 weeks, and you have no benefits. The downsides become very apparent. Historically, workers like Don, who are classified as 1099 independent contractors, not W-2 employees, and make up about 4 to 15% of the US workforce, have not been eligible for unemployment or other job-based benefits. But last March, the federal government created PUA, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, under the CARES Act to cover non-employees. The PUA promised to give jobless freelancers and independent contractors a portion of their weekly earnings, plus a temporary bonus of $600 a week. Slide, please. Between March and April of last year, when Don put in his application, more than 30 million Americans, 1 in 5 workers, filed initial claims for unemployment relief. It wasn't just drivers like Don that needed this pay. Other kinds of freelancers who'd lost work, including journalists like me, found themselves eligible for the first time. By federal fiat, spurred by the crisis of the pandemic, the government was forced to recognize freelance and independent labor as legitimate and worthy of compensation. Slide, please. It was in the 1930s that the New Deal legislated most of the codes that still govern work. These laws and policies drew a line between what the government should do for its people, the welfare state, and what employers should do for their workers. More than in other comparable nations, where the social safety net is available based on citizenship or residency, and not just for the poor, people in the US rely heavily on their jobs for basic benefits, like healthcare and retirement. In addition to the line drawn between workplace and state, the New Deal laws drew a line between employees and non-employees. W-2 employees have the right to guaranteed minimum wage and overtime, protection from discrimination based on race, class, gender, religion, and age. They have the right to workers' comp if they get hurt or sick on the job. And crucially, as we're discussing tonight, they have the right to speak out about what's going on at work and to organize into unions under the NLRA. The government excluded some types of employees, domestic workers and farm workers, for reasons of race and class and immigration status from many of these laws, and these divisions persist. But people who receive a 1099 or a stack of 1099s at the end of the year continue to be excluded from all of these laws. Non-employees have always been a motley crew, spanning petite bourgeois, small business owners, to low-wage day laborers. The theoretical bargain embedded in this labor, freedom and flexibility in exchange for stability, has worked well for self-employed business people who aspire to be the next Ford or Bezos. But those who sell their labor on a daily basis, from bricklayers and electricians to musicians and actors to cleaners and taxi drivers, have lived with much less security. Slide, please. Bosses realized that if they could get away with classifying workers not as bona fide employees, but as contractors that they could hire and rehire, what we now call a permalancer, they could reduce their costs and liability. In entertainment and construction, unions eventually created systems to ensure that these temporary workers could still get categorized as employees. But in many other industries, misclassification as freelancers has become an essential tool of business. This is what Uber and its imitators in the so-called gig economy have inherited. A decade ago, in Uber's early days, it marketed itself as offering vehicle owners something more like a friendly carpool shift than a job. Remember the sharing economy? Slide, please. In 2019, California passed Assembly Bill 5, which implemented the ruling of a case called Dynamex Operations versus Superior Court of LA. That case held that Dynamex, a delivery company that offered same-day courier services, had unlawfully misclassified workers who did pickups and deliveries as independent contractors. This forced the workers to pay for their own equipment, insurance, and uniforms. The decision that declared that they were in fact employees was a huge one because the court relied on a broad, powerful legal test for who should or should not be an employee. That test is called the ABC test because it has 3 parts, which I won't go into great detail, but this has become the crux of why freelancers are opposing the PRO Act. Slide, please. When the ABC test became law in California through AB 5, it caused a sensation. Misclassified construction workers and Uber and Lyft drivers, they'd sued for years to try to get recognized as employees. And now under the new law, which affected many different employment laws, which is therefore different than the PRO Act, they were on track to be paid minimum wages and overtime, to get workers' comp, to be protected under wage and hour and discrimination laws. And California would finally be able to collect millions, untold millions of dollars in lost tax revenues, the taxes that employers evade by treating workers as freelancers. But some independent contractors in California, from truckers to bloggers and corporate consultants, were furious about the change in the law. Because the ABC test was so broad and brought so many people under employee status, they feared that the companies who'd hired them to do work would cancel their contracts. Sure enough, there were some stories of out-of-state publishers and other business who did drop contractors located in California. Slide, please. But instead of directing their anger toward these employers, some freelancers attacked the legislators and advocates who were trying to solve the problem of misclassification. Because many of these freelancers are writers and content creators, their collective voice was louder than it should have been, especially on social media. These people also partnered with libertarian and pro-business legal groups to sue the state of California to seek exemption from the ABC employment test. As a result, in September 2020, Assembly Bill 5 was amended with additional exemptions from the ABC test for cartoonists, translators, landscape architects, sports coaches, writers, among others. Slide, please. Now, while these workers were fighting Assembly Bill 5 piecemeal, Uber, Lyft, Instacart, DoorDash, and Postmates spent $250 million, the most in the history of California ballots, to launch a costly campaign to prevent the new law from applying to any app-based worker. In November 2020, they won. The public voted that gig economy workers should remain permanently categorized as independent contractors, a huge loss for many gig workers. Maybe it was foreseeable that upwardly mobile, white-collar freelancers would feel no common cause with these gig workers. But I had naively assumed that because of the death and devastation of the pandemic and the welfare state expansions that we saw under the CARES Act, which again included the extension of unemployment benefits to people like me, there would be some unity among this working class within the independent category. Slide, please. To some extent, there is unity. I have watched with wonder and maybe some fear as President Biden has given the most pro-union speech in US history and has pushed for infrastructure plans, job plans that prioritize home health care and green transit. One of his priorities is, of course, what we're talking about tonight, the PRO Act, which could truly revolutionize the way all of us, including freelancers, work. Slide, please. The version of the PRO Act passed in the House has a special provision for freelancers like me. By adopting the ABC test to determine who counts as an employee for purposes of the right to organize, it would change the NLRA to apply to gig workers, independent truckers, freelance journalists, and consultants for the first time. Again, as it stands now, we 1099 workers do not have any protected right to organize. In fact, when we do try to coordinate around pay or working conditions, we risk being accused of price fixing and conspiracy. If the PRO Act were to pass, 1099 drivers could form unions to pressure Uber and Lyft for health and safety protections. Online booksellers could organize for protection against arbitrary removal from the Amazon marketplace. And independent, non-salaried writers like me, we could collectively bargain for the first time with magazines and newspapers. And yet, because the PRO Act incorporates the ABC test to expand, it has provoked a replay of the anger over AB5 in California. Slide, please. A few months ago, I began to see white-collar freelancers agitating against the PRO Act on Twitter. According to their posts, the PRO Act would kill the freedom we have in our jobs, turning us into 9-to-5 robots. I interviewed several of these anti-PRO Act freelancers for a reported opinion essay I recently published in the New York Times. One of my sources was a woman I'll call N, a proud and eloquent writer for hire. N told me that she earns more than $100,000 a year and that over more than 2 decades, she has managed to raise a family and survive illnesses on that income. We aren't workers, we are business owners, N told me. Although she understands that the PRO Act would only affect the right to organize, she fears that the ABC test will spread to federal wage and hour laws and everything else governing workers. Quote, "It will create a new standard where we'll be misclassified as employees," she said. This turns the idea of misclassification on its head. It baffles and troubles me that so many white-collar workers and fellow freelance journalists, given all that we know about our fragile industry, should be so hostile toward worker organizing. It also baffles me that they are so blind to what's really going on in our global economy. Slide, please. When I worked as a legal services lawyer, I represented many low-wage workers who were classified as contractors but were in reality employees. I remember an immigrant salon worker who went into thousands of dollars of debt because she had no employer-provided health insurance. I remember some commercial cleaners whose bosses tried to deny them workers' comp for lung disease. And I remember nannies who never qualified for unemployment. Their misclassification without the strength of the ABC test was really difficult to prove. As a journalist, having interviewed dozens of Uber and Lyft drivers and old school taxi drivers before them, I've seen how little freedom and independence these freelance workers actually enjoy. It's really the corporations who determine the conditions of their work day to day and who could unplug them as swiftly as they allow them to log on. Slide, please. I have never thought that the situation of low-wage gig workers has nothing to do with me, nor am I alone in this. My fellow members in the Freelance Solidarity Project, an organizing effort for freelancers in journalism, because again, we can't have an official union, which is housed under the National Writers Union of the United Auto Workers. We nearly unanimously support the PRO Act, including the ABC test. I'm encouraged by the high levels of support for unions and worker organizing among young people. Those who entered the workforce after the 2008 mortgage scam and amid the rise of our monopolistic tech economy, amid this climate change, this catastrophe that we're all facing together, the people who must now navigate a late pandemic or post-pandemic world. These workers have no illusions about the state of the economy. Slide, please. I believe that all of us must agitate for more rights on the job while simultaneously pushing for universal health care, sick and family leave, and a minimum income detached from work so that the divide between employee and freelancer becomes more of a slope than a cliff. But even if we had abundant public goods, there will still be companies and individuals, bosses and workers. So all of us, gig workers and white-collar freelancers, we will still have to pick a side. So my question for freelancers out there is, do we want to stand with Amazon and Uber executives or with working people and families? We have to ask who has the power in this economy, and we have to fight to make sure that we take that power for ourselves. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Tammy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are going to move into a Q&A. I linked Tammy's opinion piece in the chat just so everyone can read that. It's really informative, and I know that and I've spoken with DSA members about how thankful we are for your work in documenting and helping us remember these stories of freelancers and workers in our country. It's like the evidence that we need for why we need the PRO Act right now. And I want to take a moment to answer some questions. I think we have less time than we anticipated for our Q&A, but Spencer, I will hand it over to you to pick out a question for us to answer.
Sure. Thank you, Lila. Sorry, I have you spotlighted, and I'm going to try and undo that. There we go. So just because we only have time for one question here, I'm going to be picky, and I'll try and answer the other ones in the chat. But we'll go with Ethan's question on Miles's story. And he's asking, is a labor organizing campaign the process of workers forming a union? And I don't know, maybe if we can have Miles answer that, that'd be great.
Yes, that would be what I was talking about. A union organizing campaign is when a group of workers reach out to a union and well, you can even form your own union if you want. The laws are there to either have a already organized union or create your own.
Great. Thank you. And I'm being told we have time for a few more questions. So let's see here. Daniel is asking, how likely is the bill to get through the Senate? And how likely is it to get past the filibuster? And I think Mark might have some information on that.
Yeah, I think we can cover that in a little bit after the Q&A.
Okay, great. Then I will grab another one here. So Elizabeth asked, what have we learned from the Amazon effort in Alabama that would apply to Montana? And I know Tammy had a slide about the Alabama organizing, so maybe we can have Tammy answer that.
I feel bad because I'm not in Montana to really know the conditions. I have to say that just looking from outside of the state, I've just been really moved at how activists and the unions have fought back against the right to work push in the new legislature. You know, I really admire the work that all of you guys are doing in Montana. I think all of us have a ton to learn from the Bessemer campaign. You know, I think one of the takeaway lessons for me has been how important it is to build a community campaign alongside the labor campaign inside of the workplace. I think they've just done a fantastic job of really doing a 360 on making clear what the stakes are for everybody, you know, in a right to work state. It's incredible, you know, and with really low wage Black workers standing up and saying, we're not going to take this. So to me, it's really a lesson about how to figure out who your allies are and just put everything on blast. So I wish them luck in the count.
And so do we. Thank you, Tammy. Okay. And I guess we might as well just do our other question here. So clarification question from Ethan. What is a captive audience meeting and how do they impact labor organizing? And I'm going to throw that one to Miles.
A captive audience meeting is something that an employer will put on, and they have like in the campaign that I was talking about, they actually if one of the employees didn't show up for work that day, they actually had makeup days for the captive audience meetings, and it's basically what they did is they had those labor anti-union attorneys put on presentations about how, you know, all the stuff that I showed you was from those captive audience meetings where they you know tried to make unions look bad and tell you that basically the employer didn't need you and that they could do without you.
And we'll just do one more and then we'll wrap things up here. So let's see here. So we had a question from let's see, who was it? It was Grady. Has anyone touched on the 5 senators, Maine's Angus King, Kristen Sinema, and Mark Kelly of Arizona, Manchin, Mark Warner of Virginia, who have not signed or voiced their support of the PRO Act in the Senate. So those are the Democrats that have not signed on to the PRO Act. I guess anyone who has an answer to that, chime in.
I can answer that one. So right now, as a standalone bill in the Senate, the PRO Act has the sponsorship of 45 Democratic senators, including our Senator Tester, but there are 5 Democrats who have not. 2 weeks ago, DSA and the Working Families Party and the Painters Union, the Communication Workers Union, and some other groups came together and generated 500,000 phone calls to convince people in those states to call their senators to step forward and adopt the PRO Act, to co-sponsor the PRO Act. And I might just say that there's been some changes even since then. So for this event, we had invited both Senator Tester and Senator Daines to this forum. Senator Tester, who does support the PRO Act, as I said, apologized for not being able to attend. Senator Daines responded to say he couldn't make it either. We have researched public statements by Senator Tester about the PRO Act and found none except for his co-sponsorship of the bill. Today, we received notice that Senator Tester will appear tomorrow at 2 p.m. On a Montana AFL-CIO Facebook forum to make a statement in support and to take questions from participants. We are delighted that Senator Tester will make his first public statement of support for the PRO Act tomorrow. And we encourage you to participate in that forum tomorrow. If you could put the link for that Facebook chat in the, if you would, Spencer, you go to this link and at 2 o'clock tomorrow you can participate. We asked Senator Tester to become more of a public champion of the PRO Act than he has been so far. The PRO Act will now be a part, and here's the change, okay? The PRO Act will now be a part of the giant infrastructure bill the Biden administration proposed last week instead of a standalone bill. And the PRO Act in this giant bill must not be lost in the complicated legislative process that may last until the end of the summer or even longer. More than ever does Senator Tester need to stand strong with the working people of Montana. With its inclusion in the infrastructure bill, the PRO Act's chances have seemed to improve. This is good and seemed to improve because it might avoid the filibuster question, right? So that goes back to that earlier question. It may, there's no guarantee that it will, but at least it has a chance. And that's good, and made more so by the support of the Biden administration. Also, we must ask Senator Daines, we shouldn't forget about our other senator, to also support the PRO Act for the welfare of working Montanans. But, the PRO Act will not pass without you. The corporate elite are out to destroy this bill. They see this as a threat to their undemocratic hold over our country. They will stop at nothing to defeat the PRO Act, okay? And if you think these stories about employers trying to crush unions, you ain't seen nothing yet with the organized business class and corporate class working against the PRO Act. But that's why you are important. And what they have in money, we have more so in people. Just remember that. But you need to do your part. Many hands make the load light, as they say. As this legislation takes many twists and turns, stick with us as we build with others the winning coalition of workers and supporters across the state. We need solidarity like never before, because by organizing our power, we can get a lot more done than even the PRO Act. Join us on May 1st, International Workers' Day, for events to organize support for this critical legislation. The Montana DSA chapters will be organizing more events with others, including the Sunrise Movement, of course, to build the critical mass necessary to win this. So stay in touch, and most importantly, get involved. I pass it to you, Isabel.
Thank you so much, Mark. Yes, again, we will be rallying here in Bozeman on Friday, this Friday, April 9th, at 5 p.m., starting at the library and walking to the courthouse. There will be another march happening in Missoula, and if you are in neither of those places, check in with your local DSA chapters to see if they will be doing something. All this information, I believe, is now in the chat as well as in both of our social medias. And finally, I just want to thank everyone for being here. It meant a lot to me to be here with you all, to learn from all three of our panelists. A few things that really, really stuck with me. Miles said that we are all cornered. We live in this place, in this society where we are being cornered by all of these issues. And Ty said in the chat that it gets so emotional when people cannot pay rent, but they cannot afford not to work. And finally, Tammy spoke about the worthiness, being worthy of being worthy of compensation. I want to live in a world where we are all inherently worthy of compensation. We should not have to feel unworthy of our right to live here. So with that, again, envision this world where we all are worthy. I am trying to every day ground in that it is possible. Thank you all so much for being here, and join us on Friday.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Good job, everyone.
Great seeing everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Zach.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks, Ty.
Thanks, everyone. Trying to play the outro song here, but having trouble finding the right window, so my apologies. There we go.
We'll deduct that from your pay.
All right, thank you, great everyone. It was awesome to have everyone, and solidarity forever.
Shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. Yet what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? But the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. It is we who plowed the prairies, built the cities where they trade, dug the mines and built the workshops, endless miles of railroad laid. Now we stand outcast and starving amid the wonders we have made, but the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. They have taken untold millions that they never toiled to earn, but without our brain and muscle not a single wheel can turn. We can break their haughty power, gain our freedom when we learn that the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. In our hands is placed greater than their hoarded gold, greater than the might of atoms, magnified 1,000-fold. We can bring to birth a new world from the ashes of the old, for the
Union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong.
Yeah!
Woo!
All right. See y'all. Hey, y'all killed it.
Peace.
Awesome.
Good night.
Thank
Good
you
night.
so much. Good night. That was incredible.